We begin with breaking news. U.S. President Donald Trump says he has struck his biggest trade deal yet, and he's agreed to a trade framework with the European Union, announcing tariffs at 15% on European imports rather than the initial threat of 30%. The U.S. and the European Union account for a third of global trade in goods and services.
I think it's great that we made a deal today instead of playing games and maybe not making a deal at all. I think it's, I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
We have a deal. We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world. And it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. It will bring stability. It will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. It's 15% tariffs across the board, all inclusive.
Journalist Nick Harper is in Washington and following this story. So, Nick, the news just breaking moments ago. What do we know about this deal so far?
Yeah, Natasha, well, we certainly know that it got done very, very quickly. They were really just in the room for about an hour or so before they came out with the news that a deal had been struck. And as we heard there from the US president, they are billing this as the largest deal ever done. In 2024, last year, about $2 trillion of trade was done between the European Union and the United States. The US now getting access to the 27-member bloc of the EU. We're told that they are all opening up to US trade. Just to run through some of the details, it'll be a 15% tariff across the board on EU goods entering the United States. So that is lower than the threatened 30%, but certainly higher than the desired 0% that the Europeans were pushing for. A couple of exclusions: pharmaceuticals are not covered in this deal, and steel and aluminium coming from the European Union will remain at a 50% tariff rate. On top of that, we're told that the EU will purchase US military equipment. It'll buy about $150 billion in US energy and make $600 billion worth of investments in the United States. As we heard from Ursula von der Leyen, she is pleased with this. She says it will bring stability and predictability. But she was asked what had the US given up in all of this. Essentially, were there concessions put on the table by Washington? She seemed to dodge that question, instead saying that we started from a point of imbalance and we hit a point where we were able to rebalance. The suggestion being that this is perhaps more of a win for the United States than it is for the European Union. So countries around the world, including Canada, will be looking at this and seeing what lessons they can learn. Because, of course, Canada also rushing towards that August 1st deadline when tariffs come into effect. Donald Trump said that he was looking at deals with 3 or 4 other countries, not mentioning by name. Those potentially could come up in the next few days. And he did say that countries would either be receiving a letter of confirmation that a tariff was coming into effect or a letter that a deal had been struck. I'm sure Canada will be watching this and hoping that they are on the list of countries that is able to do a deal in time, to try and carry out some sort of last-minute deal-making and perhaps get a preferential rate, a better deal for having waited until the last moment. This now brings the total of deals for the United States, I believe, to 6, following one with Japan a few days ago, and now this very big deal topping that Japanese deal with the European Union.
Nick Harper in Washington. Thank you, Nick. And we want to continue with this story and invite to the show Carlo Dade. He is the Director of International Policy, School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and he's the founder of the New North American Initiative. Today we're reaching him in Saskatoon. Carlo, thank you so much for making time for us.
My pleasure.
Carlo, this news just breaking, and I don't know how much you've been able to absorb of it yet, but again, I'll do some of the highlights of the deal between the United States and European Union. 15% tariffs across the board on EU goods entering into the United States. The deal also calls for $600 billion in investments in the United States by the European Union. Also, substantial investment in American energy and infrastructure and military procurements. So that's quite a bit. but they are going to be hit by the 15% tariffs. When you look at that from a Canadian perspective, as we're still trying to work out our deal with the U.S., what are your key takeaways?
The lines are becoming increasingly clear as we get these announcements of agreements to sit down and talk about coming to an agreement. So these aren't deals in the traditional sense of everything being locked up, except in the case of the UK, where the Federal Register has actually published terms. So we're getting clear outlines of the parameters for negotiations. There will, if this follows the UK and Japan and Indonesia, be some form of investment. There will be a baseline tariff, which is something the think tanks working for Trump to come into power talked about for 2 or 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years in advance. So those outlines are becoming clear. For Canada, the question is, are we also going to get a baseline tariff? And it looks increasingly like that's gone from less of a probability to more likely.
It's true, and even our Prime Minister and the trade negotiators from Canada are saying it's been tough going. There's still a lot of work to be done, and the deadline keeps approaching closer and closer for August 1st. You mentioned the United Kingdom as being one of the countries that does have a solid deal, not just a framework, not just an outline or an agreement, but actual parameters that have been agreed upon and signed off on. So what can Canada learn from that agreement that's been reached?
Sure. So everything that was announced originally, I think beef was mentioned with the first announcement, didn't show up in the UK from the UK government. And it wasn't mentioned by the White House and certainly wasn't mentioned in the executive order. Not that it would show up because it's a UK concession. So not everything you hear will show up, but the Americans are out to get real concessions. For the UK, it was a cap on autos and a flat rate on autos above the cap, 100,000 cars a year. So we're looking at some sort of higher cost for doing business with the U.S. The cost of the free and easy U.S. market that we've enjoyed in the past appears, by the facts and evidence from other countries, to be heading towards a thing of the past. Remember, we currently have a deal with the U.S. We are one of the countries, along with Mexico, that has a deal, China too, arguably, a deal with the U.S. I think the terms of that current deal, the agreement to exclude things that were included or fall under CUSMA, I don't see how it can stay on the table if everyone else is going to be forced to pony up more in terms of a baseline tariff for access to the U.S.
It seems that the President of the United States is quite busy and occupied and even optimistic about other trade negotiations. He was optimistic about the European Union. He's going to be talking with China again this week. He's talked about other Asian nations that he's interested in reaching a deal with. And yet Canada does not seem to be a key priority for this administration. What are we to make of that?
Well, remember that it was just last week. I think the president said there was going to be no deal with Japan. It was off the table. You got up to go to the fridge to get something to eat. You came back and there's a deal with Japan. So this situation is extremely volatile and facts can change very quickly. Also bear in mind, the president announced that he did have an agreement with Vietnam, and Vietnam's been silent. There's news out of Asia that they didn't hear the same thing that Trump heard when they came to an agreement. So this is all very fluid. We can't take one individual fact and evidence or one individual comment and run with it.
Okay, so then the counter to that is, what do you make so far of how our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and our federal government has been managing this deal?
It's hard to tell. Again, you have, 90 deals in 90 days. The administration's worked its way through. The UK deal does not appear to be that bad. Japan wound up taking, I think it's 15% baseline tariffs. Vietnam is reported to have capitulated completely to grant the Americans total access for 24%. So there are no good deals really coming out of this. The fact that we don't have one, I don't know is that good or is that bad? It's hard to argue looking at the deals that have come out so far. But what I think is clear is that there will be no good deal. So I think the current government saying that they're going to get a good deal for Canadians, I think they need to come clean and say they're going to try and get the least worst deal possible. Start preparing Canadians for the eventuality that we lose the incredible deal we have now, which is that everything under the North American Trade Agreement is exempt. So I would say that they do need to start preparing Canadians for that potential reality, and maybe start taking steps that we didn't take when Trump dumped tariffs on us this winter to prepare the Canadian economy, to prepare exporters, to work with provincial governments to start adapting measures to make that transition.
And on that point of adapting the Canadian economy to get ready for at least the next few years of tariffs coming from the United States, talk to me about how the provinces are managing this, what we've seen come from the provincial premiers and territorial premiers meetings, and how they are negotiating independently with various states.
So, this is going to be on for longer than a couple of years. We have Trump, and then we have whatever comes after Trump on within the Make America Great Again movement and from the emerging left. So we're looking at continued, I think, uncertainty for the longer term. I'm in Saskatoon for the U.S. Council of State Governments Midwest region. Every 7 or 9 years, Canadian provinces host their U.S. counterparts. The provinces, unique to Canada, Mexico doesn't do this, provinces are members of these U.S. state organizations. And here's where the rubber meets the road on the relationship. We work on issues other than tariffs: credential recognition, energy transition. Remember during the pandemic, where we had cooperation with vaccines. So for things that impact people's everyday lives outside of tariffs, a lot of the work is done at the provincial and state level. The U.S. relationship with the U.S. is unique in that foreign policy is not just a federal responsibility. The reality is the provinces do a lot. So what's happening this weekend is important. We're going to be stuck with the U.S. for the long term. And the day in, day out work that the states and provinces do is key to assure that we can continue to survive being stuck next to the Americans and potentially profit, potentially do well by it in the future.
Carlo Dade, very good to speak with you and get your insights, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.